What is the return on investment? How much I'm going to spend and what's the value I'm getting out of it? In those instances, you want to drive adoption, right? You want to get the solution in the hand of people. Now, to get this in the hand of people, you want to follow a land and expand strategy.
You're now listening to Monetize, the Art of Pricing.
Welcome, Shah. And I'll probably start off checking in with you for a quick introduction and a background about what you do. And then maybe we can get deep in and start talking about interesting things in the world of pricing.
Thank you, Abhishek. Again, pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. I always love speaking about pricing and pricing strategy. So again, you'll hear me nerding out a lot all throughout this podcast. So first of all, what I do pricing strategy at Salesforce, as Abhishek mentioned. I am the monetization lead for our Service Cloud portfolio. So if you use Service Cloud or you're using Agentforce today or tomorrow, you will see that some of my work is kind of like what you're paying for. So I've been working in pricing strategy for quite a while. I've been at Salesforce for almost 3 years. I've worked across different clouds, started off with Marketing Cloud. Then I was the monetization lead for Commerce Cloud and now Service Cloud. So it's been pretty interesting going across different clouds and learning about the different parts of the businesses. I have been working in pricing strategy even before. I was in Simon Kucher, people familiar with it, one of the world's leading pricing strategy consulting firm, and also an expert in growth strategy. So I was there for 3 years. Did a lot of work in terms of SaaS pricing, working with unicorn Series A enterprises, and a lot of pricing around restaurants. So I've done a lot of pricing in terms of burgers, fries, and shakes. And you will be surprised. There's a lot of similarities, and I use a lot of fast food analogies to explain pricing. So as we progress in our conversations today, beware that it's coming. So yeah, all of that, 6 years in terms of pricing strategy. I love the work. I feel it's super interesting. It's very complex as well in today's world with all of these things, generative AI, consumption, subscription. What is the silver bullet to make money? It's a burning question, but again, it's interesting and keeps us up at night. So again, back to you, Abhishek, and I'm looking forward to all the questions you're going to ask me.
Thanks for that introduction, and especially with your background, in pricing consulting and having worked on non-software pricing as well. That's something very interesting, and we are going to be touching into how that works and maybe draw correlations with software, right? But just starting off from the start, right? And getting right into the key aspect or the interesting thing that's happening around us today. So, of course, Salesforce recently came up with pricing that's based on conversation or conversion, right? Like essentially moving a value metric from what's been subscription to this. So let's talk about that a little bit, right? And maybe the first thing was what led to the change, or when did this thinking around changing this start, right? And how did that come about?
Okay, so let's take a step back and think about the changes in the industry and the direction you needed to take as an organization. And it's not just Salesforce specific, but every kind of organization who's working in the realm of generative AI and kind of solutions which are more autonomous and everything. So the first thing is that you have a lot of cost in today's world, AWS costs, computing costs, LLM gateway costs, and everything. So when you are kind of selling your solution or people are using your solution, the costs are also scaling. So when cost scales, it becomes very difficult to create subscriptions, right? So then you kind of start thinking about how do I scale my pricing in terms of the usage, which takes care of the cost itself. So that's one of the, let's say, key principles or reasons why you will see consumption-based or hybrid kind of pricing becoming more popular. The second thing is when you have solutions which are revolutionary, let's say technology, which is going to change the whole arena of how we do work, how we think about things, how we think about a solution, how we think about cost even, right? That's where people are more skeptical about the solutions because they don't really know what they're going to get out of it. What is the return on investment, how much I'm going to spend, and what's the value I'm getting out of it? In those instances, you want to drive adoption, right? You want to get the solution in the hand of people. Now, to get in the hand of people, you want to follow a land and expand strategy. Generally, product-led growth, uses-based pricing, all of this play into that realm and helps you to kind of get in that regard. So I would say that's the second thing. And the third thing, which is also very important, that companies have been successful doing consumption and usage-based pricing. Look at the Snowflakes of the world, the AWSs of the world, right? Like they have figured out a way, they have made the market also adopt, right? The way they go to market, the way people think about like technical solutions and everything. So that's another thing. So if you take all of these three in account, like the cost piece, market expectation, the solutions, but they're more revolutionary now than before, and it's more of a, let's say, green field. And then the third one is there have been people like companies who have done this very well and have been able to drive the market confidence. So taking all those three things together, I believe that it is at the right time to make this shift, and it is a necessary shift, and it is a pivotal moment as well.
Right. Absolutely right. I mean, we see that happening quite a bit in the market right now over the past few years, right? Like, but each company has its own journey of making that pricing change, right? Like the market definitely is indicating the direction. So, and especially at very large companies, there's always a slight distinction between what the CFO of the company who's thinking from predictability perspective, and then there is a significant change that somebody else is thinking of with respect to changing pricing. So typically, what is that inflection moment, right? Is it externally driven or does it come from an internal driven? And how was that at Salesforce? Did a customer come up and say this? Was it like looking at the market? How does that inflection point come about in this journey?
Very good question. So there's two pieces of how to think about it, right? So the one thing is when you have billions of dollars, right, in a business through a revenue model or a business model, it's very hard to risk it, right? Let's say Google, they made their move to Gemini and everything, but when? After ChatGPT and OpenAI kind of like pushed them towards that. So that's one thing. So we are a $35 billion company. So every decision, you will have to be thinking through what is the implications or risk to our revenue, cannibalization and everything. So that's one part. That is super important. The second part is, again, what is happening in the market, right? Like what is the trends telling us? How fast is the change happening? And if we don't move, what is going to happen? We don't want to be the Kodak of the future, right? I mean, so that's another thing. So innovation, speed, and then also like how fast and how are your competitors reacting? So all of these things will going to like push and pull in different directions. So yes, there is an internal challenge. Of course, there are people who will think about changing it quickly. Of course, there are people within different business units who do think this is a risk, right? Because it's a huge company, like not just Salesforce, every company like Microsoft and all of these, well, they have different business units. Everybody has their revenue targets and everything. Suddenly, generative AI, you're changing the price model. There are implications, right? Some might win, some might lose. Not everybody's going to win in that big change. So that's one internal challenges. And then to the external challenges, if you don't move, if you don't making progress enough, if you're sitting, everybody's noticing, investors, right? Like there was a lot of initial excitement around generative AI when kind of like OpenAI and ChatGPT came out. Soon we saw like articles coming out is, hey, this is great, but how do we make money with this AI thing? And now we're at that inflection point of figuring out how to monetize all of these use cases, all of this value, this productivity gains and everything. And it is going to happen. Somebody is going to do it. So the smart companies, I would say, is the ones trying to do it at the forefront.
Right. So, you're right in the sense that this move that came about was slightly on the news because it was a pivotal shift in terms of how you price, right? So everybody's been talking about it. But taking a step back, I'm sure there are more simpler changes to pricing that happens on a more regular periodic basis, right? Like that must have happened in your journey. So as someone who does pricing, like, I mean, of course, we'll talk about the highlight moments like changing a whole pricing model, but on a daily basis or on a quarterly basis, how does somebody within a company think about pricing, right? Or pricing and packaging, if I can kind of extend that, right? And I'm just not talking about pivotal changes, but even incremental changes or smaller changes. Yeah.
A very good question, Abhishek. I would like to explain it let's kind of divide it into two pieces, right? So, this is kind of like my day-to-day job, and so I'll go slowly about it. So the first part is, let's say I work very closely with product managers. I work with a bunch of product managers across Service Cloud. and they're all working on different features, different products which they want to launch, right? So they will come to me. I am kind of like the commercial gatekeeper. They'll come to me, hey, Shah, I want to launch this product or this feature and everything. And then we start our assessment. The assessment is in terms of understanding, is this product going to make us money? Is this feature going to make us money? Is it going to make our portfolio stronger? Is there upsell potential, cross-sell potential? What is the jobs to be done, right? So is this something sales can sell? So I'm going to do a assessment in terms of the feasibility of the benefits, and then an assessment on the effort side, right? I mean, we're not going to launch something which is going to make us a few $1 million with using all these resources. So I would say that's the first thing. Should we launch a product or not? And if we launch it, should it be an add-in or an add-on? What it means that should you bundle this feature into an existing product to make it stronger, right? Or should it be a separate product of its own?
Does that mean like when the product team comes to you, they're more often than not coming to you at a planning stage, like even before they're thinking of launching a product? Is that so you get to have all of these insights?
Exactly. So you've read, there is this book about Madhavan wrote about
Yeah.
monetizing innovation. He's a
Yeah.
partner from Simon Kucher. And his book, if you read it, it talks about doing this research, thinking about what the customer needs even before you build a product. Because you don't want to build a product with 10 features where customer requires 6 features or 6 and are willing to pay for 6. And then what do you do with the rest of the 4, right? So yes, we do have these discussions very early on, as before even like the product work and the hypothesis building and everything in terms of the pricing and packaging is happening. And after a project is approved, then we start working on the commercial framework and all.
So it's awesome. Yes, I mean, I have read the book, like, and I've had a chance to meet Madhavan very briefly once as well, and very fascinating thoughts, right? Like in terms of how to think about pricing, but how does it get implemented in reality, right? Like, so, for example, many early stage companies, I have built a couple of early startups myself, right? Theoretically, what is saying makes sense, right? Like, but more often than not, till you reach a certain stage, right, you're primarily worried about gathering logos, getting customers, trying to get feedback, and very difficult to think of pricing as a lever very early, right? Maybe very seasoned companies do that. So how do you kind of like think through that, right? Like on a practical level, when do companies should be thinking about it from implementing pricing, right? Because let me put it in a different way. A company who thinks about pricing very strategically, very early, at an early stage is still going to give fairly large discounts or workaround if you have a big customer coming and signing up with you, right? So how do you work through this paradox in a certain way?
No, very good question. So first of all, we were talking about like products, right? Like, okay, we approve or we don't. And then let's say from a list of 10, there's 2 or 3 which get prioritized or resources allocated. And then we start building the pricing and packaging, which is obviously the research and all of that. Now, going back to your question, how do we do it? Smaller company and everything and bigger company. I would say the biggest challenge and there's 2 pieces of it. When you are a large organization like the Salesforce and the Microsofts of the world, you can actually do a lot. You have resources, right? You have 10 paths you can take. So it's more about, should I build this feature first because it helps my product today? Or should I build this feature first because it is going to help me gain customer acquisitions and everything? So that is a very important thing, how you prioritize projects at large enterprises, because you have resources. When you go into the smaller scale or let's say down market, you already have a market leader, right? Let's say you're going into the e-commerce world. You already see Shopify is there. They've done all these 50 features and everything. And out of those 50, 20 are must-haves, right? So then the prioritization and project approvals and everything becomes a little less important because you know already what you need to do. And then how do we get there? So it's execution and implementation becomes a little more important. So I'm just saying, like, yes, there is a strategic part, but then again, for the bigger companies, it's more of the choice. You don't want to make the wrong choice.
Got it. But that makes sense, right? Like, so, sorry, I'm just going to go back to the earlier conversation, which we kind of moved away, where you said you were talking about how a pricing team works within the org, right? So you spoke about the product working with you very early, and you said there were 2 parts. So I'm just going back to that because I think that's an important aspect to understand how pricing teams function within a large organization. Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about projects coming in. We do an assessment, then we work with our execs like the CPO and people who are reporting to him, our different GMs and all, and then we get projects prioritized. So let's say out of 10, 3 projects on products got prioritized, which we are planning to launch in the next 3 to 6 months, right? Then I start working on the real pricing and packaging work, right? So you build your hypothesis in terms of there's 3 pieces when you were doing pricing. The first piece is packaging. What is the offering that is going out to the customer, right? So you want to make sure you have all these must-haves the customer really needs. Your packaging includes those. If you are targeting different customer segments, you make sure your product or packaging is aligning to those different customer segments. So very important piece. We spend a lot of time creating hypotheses around those. The second piece, which is very important, is the price model or how you charge your customers. So whenever people think about pricing, they're like, oh, what's the price, the number? I mean, yes, it's important, but the more important part is how do you charge your customers? So what is your price model? Is it a subscription? Is it pure consumption? Is it hybrid? Very important question today. And then the second piece is, what is that price metric, right? So how does your value scale for your customer? And when that value scales, how do you get a cut of that kind of like the value your customer is realizing? And also, how do you make sure it's something simple and predictable? So if you have those 2 pieces sorted, you are kind of like sorted on how you charge your customer and you've made sure it's a win-win situation. And then the last piece is, okay, we have to figure out the price. How do you figure out the price? Price is a result of the perceived value, right, in the market. So you want to understand the perceived value of your solution versus the perceived value of your competitor. So you have that. And then the second piece is your strategic objective, right? So you can have a lot of value, but you can price yourself low because you want to gain market share. But you can have a certain amount of value and then charge a premium as well because you want to maintain your price premium and brand premium. So that's like the last piece. So if you think about pricing, packaging first, price model, how you charge your customer, and the last and important piece is what you charge your customer. This is how I would say generally the work goes in. So you do the hypothesis building, you create the hypothesis around all of these 3 pieces. You go into market research, again, very important, talking to customers, talking to sales, talking to people on the ground, and you validate these hypotheses. You gather the insights, which helps you to finalize and craft the final pricing and packaging recommendations. So I would say that's kind of like the process. Takes around 4 to 6 weeks. And then in the final 2 weeks or 1 week, you do like a lot of modeling in terms of understand like what happens if you go into this new pricing and packaging. What is the impact to your existing customers, new customers? And the end goal is always to make more money. So if you're making more money, so it's good.
Absolutely right. So you're right. So this essentially what you're saying is it's something that takes about 2 months and on an average to kind of like change, right? Like, so what's the operational lift behind that, right? Like, so yeah, of course, the product and the pricing works very closely, but who else is typically involved in this process every time you do like something, you're looking at something like price, right? Who do you need to buy in internally? Like, for example, does the finance team figure in, right? Is that like a business team or a business case that you have to go make, right? So who are the different stakeholders that have a say in it and who needs soft or hard influence when it comes to pricing? And I ask this because because we've built like a pricing billing company, and many times we talk to customers and we ask them, hey, who is responsible for pricing, right? And many times till a certain scale, it's always the answer is like, hey, it's something that we do together. It's just different people involved. Like, of course, at companies of scale, there is a pricing team, but I'm sure even you need buy-in because it's such a key, like thing about the entire company, this pricing aspect. So yeah, so who all do you need to get in? How does your job work as a diplomat within the company, if I might put it that way? Yeah.
No, very good question. And this is one of my favorite questions because when you're working in pricing strategy or growth strategy, you're working across the organization. So yes, in Salesforce, the pricing organization is part of corporate strategy, which reports to our CPO. So we are working closely with product. Yes, they are key stakeholders. They are a partner in crime and everything. But then we work with very, very important other stakeholders who are critical to the whole process. So let's go one by one. We work on the strategic part, right? Like, oh, I'm like, this is the strategy and everything. But is this strategy something that can be implemented? Can this be something delivered to the customer? There's a lot of nuances there. Product operations is our partner in crime there. So every time I build a strategy, I would reach out to my product operation counterpart like, hey man, I'm putting this together. Does this like work? Are these SKUs available? Does this work with this solution? Does this work with here and there? So that's definitely the feasibility of your strategy needs to be figured out. So they're important. Go to market is super important. Go to market is the ones who help us in terms of we are targeting different segments, right? So are these the right segments? Is this the right bullseye? Is this the right ACV up, let's say revenue uplift we're projecting and everything? So they help us in that regard and helping us with some of the modeling and making sure we target the right segments and everything. Then we have revenue recognition. So when we're creating our like different solutions, we have different clouds within Salesforce, right? Like as I was mentioning, and they operate like different companies. And then there is a revenue attribution recognition piece. So I have to work with them very closely in terms of making sure that the pricing and packaging works in the way it's expected to recognize the revenue in the appropriate way. So there another one, finance, again, very critical, right? I mean, we have costs, we have margin targets. So you have to go to finance every time and try to understand what are their expectations and you aligning like your product and pricing strategy, your discount approval matrices and everything accordingly. Then we have another team, which is renewals. So again, you're bringing a new solution, but then again, you have existing customers. How does it impact them? What do we do with them? What is the migration strategy and everything? We work across that. And then last, I would say, is product marketing. Super important, right? We are doing all this strategy, but and we are thinking this is the value we want to communicate to the customer. Then our amazing product marketers are the ones who are able to translate our thoughts into, let's say, promotions, marketing materials, stories, and narratives, which help in that regard. So yes, I'm working very closely with all of these teams, more closely with product, of course. But as we move from the strategy part into like, hey, this is what we want to do, that last 2 months of the product launch, we're working all together.
Fair enough, right? That brings me to two actually very interesting problems that I've faced, and like many people who I've spoken with speak about, right? Maybe I'll go one by one, right? The first aspect is respect to the timing of it, right? Like because you just spoke about it, is this something that it seems like such a large lift, right? Like, so let's take the example, for example, Agent Force, right? Like when you moved for that big, hey, we're going to do $2 per conversation kind of price. Is that, I mean, this sounds like this could be something that takes 6 months, 12 months, like from the way you talk about in a large company, right? And once that kind of becomes the timeline, then are we only looking at pricing lesser than we should, right? Because there is the school of thought where, hey, pricing should be something that you look at every day. It should be super granular. It could be different for different customers, different segments. But just the lift associated with that is so large, it makes it infeasible, right? So how do you bridge this gap about wanting to be very flexible and think about pricing more regularly and the time taken to just simply implement any change or operationalize this change?
No, that's a very logical question. And you're right. Pricing should be iterative. You should be keeping an eye out. You should like trial and error and all of those. Yes, that's exactly correct. All of those things. So when you think about a large company, yes, it takes a long time to launch our pricing or let's say launch a product and everything, because again, you have prioritization, all of these different stakeholders, and then you want to button it up before you launch it, right? We have more flexibility as well in terms of different things. So let's say you send out something, you priced it, maybe the price is not right. How do you notice that? The first thing is not selling as much. What you'll do is you change your discount approval metrics, you make it looser. So that is easy. That doesn't take 2 months to change. That is something I can do in 2-3 days. I'm just saying. So then you have more flexibility and you're driving that. And then you're doing some more research in terms of figuring out the price and everything. There are other ways you can provide concessions to the customer. So going back to your original question is, yes, it takes time to fix things, obviously a larger company, but we also have more things we can play with. So even if the price is something I am anticipating is not correct, I can have the time fixing some other things like making the discount approval matrix more flexible, providing some promotions or swaps or something else. I can buy some time in order to fix the pricing and packaging. So just like, yes, it is iterative, something you should look at. But then again, at larger companies, you have that flexibility. And another thing is larger companies, things move slower, right? Like even if it's a deal, the deal is going to be huge, right? Like, and it's going to take 6 to 8 months to happen. It's not like, oh, somebody's going into an app and buying something, right? So that's another piece as well.
You know, like there's this famous dialogue in Dune, right, where they say like, we plan in centuries. So it kind of like is applicable to pricing in a certain way, right? Because you plan something that's going to take a fairly long time to even I understand whether this is right or not, right? So as someone doing pricing, how do you measure success in smaller intervals, right? Because you've done something, it would take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years for you to actually see the impact of it. But how do you know you're on the right track, or how do you measure like, okay, this is what needs to be done in a shorter time frame?
So one of the key things in these instances is setting the KPIs accordingly. Because when you are thinking, right, from a portfolio standpoint, a product standpoint, there's a long-term view that, okay, I'm going to do this. Maybe I'm not going to get any benefit in the next 12 months because it's going to increase the value of my product. It is going to create like some perception and everything. But then the next year onwards, I'm going to include this add-on and they're going to sell like hotcake together. So having those incentives like short-term, long-term, what are your goals? You set those up and then measuring accordingly. So is your goal regarding cross-sell? Is your goal regarding upsell? Is your goal regarding getting more new customers or a particular segment of customers? Is your goal improving price realization? So I think people have a challenging time setting up the goals and what they want to achieve with their monetization strategy. I think that's the first piece, and a lot of more focus should be going in there. And then the second piece is obviously you should look that this was what I was planning to achieve. And to achieve this was the strategy I was taken. And so you do like that backtrack calculation or look back and why it's not happening. So yes, I would say it is challenging, but we should set up the goals in the right way so we can measure that.
Yeah, so maybe can we go a little deeper into that, right? Like, because this is something that fascinates me a lot about pricing, right? Like, so because at the end of the day, there's a lot of data that you use to kind of like take a decision, but then you have to make that case to somebody who has to see it, right? In this case, it could be the CPO or many of in which way where you're saying, okay, and somebody has to buy into that and then wait for it to play out over a longer time, right? So maybe in your experience, like maybe even one before Salesforce and one we can talk in Salesforce, right? Like you are, can we take a couple of projects, or if I might say like some things that you can, a pricing change or a large thing that you did and how it worked out? Maybe we can go into what are the things, like when you say the goal, set a goal or make a plan. How do you go about doing that? How was the research done with respect to pricing? Are there tools, techniques to do that? And can we maybe use one example of a use case to go through that in slightly more detail?
Yeah. I mean, let's do one like in details for sure.
Sure.
So in Simon Kucher, when we used to work there, one of the like key projects I would say is like a pricing diagnostic. So what you basically do is, let's say you hired me for your company. I'm like a doctor coming in. I do a diagnosis and I tell you these are like the 10 things you should do these, and this will give you this benefit, right? So now let's kind of like go through what are the things I, as a pricing strategist, would look at. Let's say, Abhishek, you hired me. I come in. The first thing I would ask you is like for all of your transactional data, right? Like all of your transactional data and everything in terms of revenue and everything. So then I'm trying to look at what? I'm trying to look at, okay, you have these different products, right? I will look at what is your discounting trend. So if I see there's a lot of discounting happening, and that gives me an idea, okay, maybe the list price is not correct, right? Or you don't have the right discount approval matrices or processes to do good price realization. So then you look into the next layer of things. Maybe your list price is not correct because market research will tell me that. We'll fix that. Or your discount guidelines or kind of like processes are not set up. We'll set that up. So that's one. Second thing you'll look at is, okay, what is your packaging structure, right? I will ask you, Abhishek, who are you targeting? And you will be like, oh, I want to, I am targeting small, medium businesses and enterprises with these two packages. And then I will look at your package, like the customers who have bought it. If I see all the enterprise customers buying your small, medium package, that means your packaging is not correct. You're giving away too much in your basic package, and then enterprise package is high price with even more things that people don't want. So then we will work on fixing your packaging structure. That okay, let's go back. Let's look at all the features. Let's distribute them again, so we get the enterprise customers to buy the enterprise package. So that's one of the packaging one. Another thing we would look at is, are there cross-sell opportunities? Maybe you're selling burgers and then you're selling fries and drinks all together. How do we create a happy meal, right? So you try to see which product is getting attached with which product, what percentage, how frequently, and everything. And that helps you to create bundles, which promotes cross-sell, right? So first you have to identify that opportunity for a cross-sell, and then you try to grab that opportunity. So I would say that's another one. Then if we kind of like continue, so we talked about pricing. Another one would be, like, say, your win rate, right? Your win loss analysis. I will look into that. Generally, companies who have a recording, like, okay, why did we lose this deal? It becomes easier to dig into it. If I see that we're losing deals against competitors because of price, more than 20-30% of the time, then let's dig into that. Like maybe our price and value, price and value, that is not connected or not aligned. It's misaligned, and that's why we're losing so many deals. So these are like the common layers of things you'll be looking at instantly and making hypotheses around them. You'll have an initial hypothesis, right? Like, oh, win rate is declining. That means there's a misalignment. Maybe, and then you do a double click. And when you do the double click, you might see that, oh, it's not just you specific. There is something happening in the market itself, and that's why this is happening. So it's not related to your product or your value or your price. It is mostly related to something else, and it will pass within 3 to 6 months. So just to give you an idea, so generally in Simon Kucher, I would go into a company and we will run a diagnosis. And at the end of the day, we'll come out and saying like, hey, you have 10 issues. Your pricing is not right here. So you fix this. This is a $10 million opportunity. Your packaging is not right. So you're missing out on this customer segment who you were supposed to target. You fix this. This is a $5 million opportunity. And at the end of the day, you see like 10 initiatives you can run, which will give you this amount of impact. And even in Salesforce, this is how you do it as well. But then we're not like a consultant right now. You don't look at the overall portfolio every day and do diagnosis. You know the initiatives that are coming in different directions, and you try to drive them.
That's fair, right? And so the same example, if you had to take it from, let's say, some coach and put it to Salesforce, right? Like within a bigger company, how would that work, right? Like in terms of like, I mean, however specific, whichever we can talk about, right? Like in case of a price changing happen, and how did he go about that? And maybe even talk a little bit about the result of it. Like if there's something that where you could go back and say, hey, we did this and this is how it eventually helped, right? Or even a failure. We tried this, but it didn't work out because of some reasons, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, eventually there's two ways I would say with thinking about pricing is, and one is when you're like a consulting firm like Simon Kucher, you're going in, you're thinking about how do we improve revenue? How do we increase it? What are the revenue leakages? And then how do we stop them? We make the company grow and everything. So they're looking at a holistic, like the portfolio and our organizational standpoint. We do the same thing in Salesforce as well. We have a different like team which works across the different clouds and does company-wide initiatives. And then there are people like me who are more focused on new product launches, right? So, I don't look at like, okay, this is the overall Salesforce portfolio. We make $5 billion today. I'm just making up numbers, but we're missing out on 500 million because of these things are misaligned. So there is a team who's working on that, and they do those diagnoses, and they're thinking about company-wide initiatives. How do we do a company-wide price increase? How do we monetize something across the overall organization and everything. So those are more company-wide initiatives. In terms of my day-to-day, as you were asking, how do I use those frameworks on a daily basis? Yeah, definitely. Like when you are thinking about pricing and packaging, I was just talking to a friend today about a different discussion, and he was asking me the exact same thing. He works in consulting, and he's like, "Man, what research and everything do you do and all that?" So I was like, one of the things you have to understand the difference between consulting and corporate is in consulting, you're trying to prove your value, prove your worth, and prove that I have looked at all these 10 things and this is the right answer. In corporate, you're using common sense a lot as well. Why I'm saying that is that let's say you have an anchor solution, right, which you charge $100 for. Now you're bringing something incremental. It's like you have a car; these are heated seats. Now you don't need to do all the research in the world to come up with a price of a heated seat. You already know that nobody's going to pay 10% more than the car's value, right? So you already have your upper limit. And then it's more about like what is the relative value compared to the anchor product itself. So let's say when I'm pricing it, I already know that this $100 product, I can charge something between $5 to $10. And now let me try to fine tune this. If you are like a consultant, you're like, let me do all this research and I'll come back and this is the right answer. So nothing wrong with that. It's just that how the work you're assigned to do. So that's what I was telling my friend was talking to that. Whenever it's a revolutionary thing, right? Like it's very native where there is no common sense to prevail, right? It's so new. I think it's right to do a lot of market research and everything. And you also have the flexibility to do so. But when you are in kind of like launching products every now and you really know the portfolio, you know the market trend and everything, common sense is what actually helps in terms of making a lot of decisions. So yes, you might think, oh, you're doing all these things and numbers and all of that, art and science. Yes, but common sense is also very important.
Like I said, I agree, right? In the sense, in more often than not, in a category that exists, so that is not too new, right? I mean, more often than not, common sense prevails in terms of how do you want to price. Like you have data
For
from
example, Agent
competition,
Force is completely new, right? I mean,
right?
generative AI and everything, totally new.
Right. So yeah. So in terms of like exactly. So in an existing thing, it makes sense, right? But let's take Agent Force, for example, or any new revolutionary technology or just something new where the value metric is not that evident, right? You want to iterate and say, okay, should I be charging based on how much it costs me? Should I be charging based on what the eventual customer is finding value, or in Agent Force itself, right? How is it different? Does the process change, or does it become different in terms of how you go about doing that for a new versus an existing system, right? Where there's competitive data, that is an understood mechanism where the customer comes and says, hey, this is the need and this is how I get billed. So tell me your pricing. Is very different from when a customer comes in and how are you going to price me? Why are you pricing me on this metric and not on this metric, right? Did you face customer backlash, for example, when positive or negative, I would say backlash a wrong word, a positive or negative feedback from customers with respect to Agent Force? Maybe some stories on how that worked out.
I mean, custom price is something everybody complains about, right? I mean,
Right.
so that's like, yes, but I'm just kidding. So, but going back to your
But
overall
true, yeah.
question, right? I mean, how do we do it differently? So, Abhishek, the answer is simple. If it is something new, you just talk to customers more, right? I mean, you do more market research. If you, let's say it's existing, I talk to 5 salespeople, I talk to 5 product people, 2 interviews with customers done. If it's revolutionary, let's do focus groups, let's do surveys, let's talk to customers more. Let's see what the experts are thinking, right? Like, what are the generative AI experts? What are the consultants of the world? So we do a lot more research. We do a lot more kind of like information gathering. I would say that is the biggest change in the process. And then also, when you have a lot more information, how do you align people to that information? How do you make decisions? So everything gets a little bit elongated, right? In terms of the depth of how you are looking into it. But other than that, the principles are the same. You still need a packaging. You still need a price model. and you still need a least price. So these are your three pieces you were trying to answer.
Does large companies also, you mentioned about like having a lot of information, right? So talking to experts. So do large companies also use external consultants? For example, do you work with external consultants on projects where you being the the pricing team, or is it more often than not beyond a certain scale something that becomes in-house?
Oh, of course. I mean, we hire like consultants. Where are they going to work? I mean, of course, large companies hire consultants.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, we do work with consultants. Of course. I mean, it depends on the initiative, depends on the corporate goal and everything. What are the answers we're trying to answer, like questions we're trying to answer? But yes, of course, we work with them fairly closely. They and definitely they answer like high level questions, and we take parts of that or those insights and build on top of it, fine tune it, and go to the final level. So, but again, to answer your question, yes, they work with us. Of course, no, it's not like in house like all the time, but it's also case by case, specific, initiative specific, I'd say.
Is it fair to say that external consultants bring in like the market perspective because they have data across a wider variety of this thing, of the market kind of customers, and then the in-house team can then put their needs onto that model in a certain way to find what's the best pricing? Is that a fair summary?
I would say yes. I would say there's two pieces of it. One is they have expertise of like best practices, right? They've been implementing, they know like they worked across different companies, they have their own benchmarks and all of that. And also like their own processes which have been successful as a consulting firm. So I would say that's one thing. And the second piece is yes, they have market insights, but at the same time, let's say you want to run a large scale market study, right? So you can engage the consulting, but you can do it in-house, like hiring vendors and everything and doing it yourself, or you can use the consulting firm to run it. Generally, they will be able to run it in a proper way, get the right insights and everything, because they're doing it much more regularly. But then again, there is no like right answer, but generally consulting firms, they have best practices. They're used to running market research, large scale market studies. And that's why they're able to answer some questions or give some insights, which are very valuable.
Awesome. So maybe, thanks for that, right? Like, and maybe a couple more questions before we kind of wrap. Like one question that's been something that I have given a lot of thought about, right? Like, and is that how does this affect sales, right? Like, so for example, let's say somebody's been selling a product that is on a fixed plan, right? Like, and they have the sales teams have incentives that are aligned to it. Now, suddenly with the change to more of a usage or a hybrid kind of model, right? Now your entire incentive structure is changed, right? So how does somebody now the question then becomes the second order effects rather, right? Hey, do I sell to this customer or do I sell to one customer who probably is going to use me more, and so on and so forth, right? So how does incentives and sales or field teams sell differently because of pricing changes? Have you seen that happen in live, or have you seen kind of questions that comes back from there with respect to this?
Oh, definitely. This is like, so when you think about pricing, growth strategy, they're all kind of like connected. So when I was in Simon Kutcher, we would always like, we work on packaging and pricing, we work on go-to-market, and then we work on sales effectiveness, which is basically you need to structure your sales incentive and everything in such a way that you get your price. Like all of this strategy is getting implemented in the way you want, right? So very important question you ask here, Abhishek, because let's say you're compensated in one way, right? And you're used to one way of selling. And then there's a big shift. Now, previously you would be like, oh, I sold 1 million. It's predictable revenue because it's subscription. I'm going to make 10% of that. Everything's great. Now you're selling something worth $5 and then you expect them to use up to 1 million. And if they do, you're going to make that money. So that is the big disconnect. And it is something that we are working through. And I think because the whole industry is shifting towards. So you're looking at best practices. What are the snowflakes of the world have done, right? Like it's not like Salesforce or others who are moving into consumption-based pricing are the first ones to do it. So what have the others done? How have they structured it? Even the way you go to market becomes a lot different, right? Because previously, yes, customer success is very important, but it's not as important as it is today, because unless your customer, you can't have shelfware anymore. I mean, the customer needs to use your solution. So so you can compensate yourself. So all of those pieces, very, I would say, fluid right now. People are trying and thinking through them, like how do we make it predictable, not just for like the salespeople, but also for a customer, because at the end of the day, you can't go and give them a big surprise as well. Like, oh, you were supposed to spend $1 million, but for some reason it became 2 million. So still fluid and still to be worked through.
Yeah, fair enough. And one last question before we kind of like wrap this, right, is we've spoken about like what happens before pricing changes, and how does somebody working in a big company or the pricing team think through pricing, right? So maybe to leave our audience with one thing would be like, what happens after? So a pricing implementation is done, you've changed pricing, right? So what is it then also the pricing team's responsibility to continuously be and track that, right? So what happens after a pricing change? How do you evaluate success, failure of something that you've implemented?
Perfect. So first of all, as I was mentioning, you have a set of objectives, right? So for example, I launched a product. The main goal was we wanted to increase our use, let's say our customer count in a particular segment. So when we did the packaging, we increased the features or the value in that particular uh, segment specific package, so we can kind of like drive adoption more in that use case. So now you have a specific objective. You have also made sure like what are the different things you're going to look at, like win rate, you're going to look at that, you're going to look at price realization for that particular segment, all of these things. And then after 3 months or 2 months, you make that time period, right? Like what is your deal velocity and how frequently you want to look back, maybe every quarter. Then you look back, like, is that being met? If it is not working the way you wanted, then there is something happening. So then you have to double click and figure that out. So that is the responsibility, I would say, for pricing strategy team, setting up the objectives, the monetization objectives, what you are really trying to achieve. There can be 10 things you're trying to achieve. And it is not just specific to only revenue. People like become very like siloed onto like revenue uplift and everything. Yes, that's important, but that's the most tangible thing. But there are a lot of intangible things you can also be playing with. Set that up and then go and track every quarter, look back. If you see things are not working accordingly, do double click.
Awesome. Thank you, Shah. Thanks for your time. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation and speaking about pricing specifically in big companies, and it's been something that I've grown to like a lot, and I think adds a lot more value that companies realize. So thanks for this conversation, and hope you enjoyed speak with me as well.
No, loved it, Abhishek. Thank you. You asked tough questions, but then again, what's the fun if you didn't? So always love talking about pricing and everything. It is super important, getting more complicated day by day with everything that's happening and all of these shifts and everything. So again, thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak about a topic I love.